What's the creepiest unsolved mystery? A Chinese girl was found in thousands of pieces in multiple bags on the street in 1996. The killer is still not found. A creepy one off the top of my head is the harassment of Bill and Dorothy Wacker, an elderly couple from Ohio. Their house had been ransacked a couple of times between 1984 and 1985. Then, in July of 1985, a stranger knocked on their door whilst Dorothy was home alone recovering from heart surgery, asking to use their phone due to his car apparently breaking down. She thought he'd left after making the call, but then was knocked unconscious by a blow to the head. Dorothy woke up bound and gagged on the kitchen floor, but thankfully managed to crawl to an open window to get help from her neighbors, who called the police. Bill then returned home to find his revolver, among a few other things, had been stolen. This was accompanied by the message "cheaper, but will do" scrawled in crayon on one of their walls. 4 months later, the revolver turned up on their porch in a bag. The harasser repeatedly phoned the couple, sometimes threatening them, and sometimes just breathing deeply down the phone like a fucking creep. Despite changing their phone number multiple times, they were unable to stop the calls. After this, they installed security lights. The harasser responded with a note saying, "You're lightZRA laugh." They were frequently left other mocking and scary notes. Dorothy was then attacked once more in 1993, a full 8 fucking years after the original attack, this time being sent to the hospital with skull lacerations. The Wackers staked out their own house after this in an attempt to find the person who had been harassing them. However, they didn't find anything. After the stakeout had been called off, they heard banging at the side of their house and found a note simply saying, "Get the message." After this, as far as I can recall, the harassment abruptly stopped. It really freaks me out. What motive would one have to harass a random old couple for years and years? They never got close to finding out who did it, and both Bill and Dorothy died without ever finding out who made their lives hell. Disappearance of the Sodder children. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia burned to the ground. There's the father, George, the mother, Jenny, and 9 children. 4 of the children escaped, but 5 were believed to have died in the fire. Then, during the search of the burned house, none of the children's remains were found. The fire was nowhere near hot enough to burn through bone, but not a trace of them were found. Here's the freaky thing. 2 months before, a visiting salesman told George his house would go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. The salesman attributed this to George's dirty remarks against Mussolini. George, an Italian immigrant, had been outspoken against Mussolini, which angered some in his Italian-American community. Another visitor later told George that his fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. This was after George just had his electricity rewired and inspected to be safe. In the weeks before Christmas, the older Sodder children noticed a car following them through the main town as they walked home from school. During the night of the fire, Jenny was awoken by a strange phone call after midnight, asking for a name she did not know. At 1 a.m., Jenny heard a loud banging on the house's roof, but went back to sleep when she did not hear anything further. Half an hour later, she smelled smoke. The fire seemed to start near the fuse box. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children who had been sleeping downstairs escaped the house. They yelled to the children upstairs, but heard no response. The fire had already been engulfing the staircase, so they could not rescue them. George tried to go outside, around the house, to use ladder, to climb the window to the attic and rescue the children. But the ladder was not in its usual place. It would be found 75 feet away in an embankment. Then George tried to drive both his truck to the window, then climb them. But neither truck would start, despite both having worked the previous day. Later, a telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought, but cut by someone. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. Other witnesses claimed to have seen the children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Years later, in the 60s, Jeannie found in the mail a letter addressed to her, postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a picture of a young man around 30 with features strongly resembling Lewis, who would have been in his 30s if he had survived. On the back was written, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, I little boys a 90,132 or 35. The Sodders never stopped believing their children were alive, and Jeannie wore black in mourning every day for the rest of her life. It gets even weirder. The initial report said the fire burned the kids' corpses entirely, but a person who worked on a crematorium said that, during a cremation, they burned the bones for 2 hours after, to fully cremate them, and the fire's temperature and the time the fire occurred weren't enough for it to happen. The salesman who visited the Sodders' house 2 months before the fire was also part of the coroner's jury that stated about the fire completely burning the kids' corpses, and one of the firemen later retracted himself, saying he found a heart of one of the kids that later was proved to be actually a rock's liver. Delphi Bridge murders. 2 preteen girls were murdered near a abandoned train bridge in Indiana, 2017. One girl got audio and video of the suspect walking toward them 2 years later, and Len is still taking tips from the public. The Satagaya family murders. The killer stayed in their house for a while after the murders, as if nothing had happened. He allegedly made himself some tea, took a nap, used their computer for a bit, and helped himself to some of their ice cream. I feel like someone who is that comfortable being in a house with people he just murdered has done it before and will probably continue as long as they are not caught. Andrew Goston. Smart boy who had a perfect attendance record skips school to go to a train station to buy a one-way ticket to King's Cross in London on his own. As soon as he leaves the station, he seemingly vanishes in an area crawling with CCTV cameras. None of the CCTV cameras in the entirety of London had saved footage of him, as the police waited 2 weeks before asking local businesses if there was any footage of him saved, and there's no evidence of him ever leaving the city. There's theories he was groomed or got snatched off the street, but that's pretty much impossible to do in such a busy area. He had a PSP on him when he disappeared, but Sony confirmed no PSN account had ever been made on his account. He had no access to the internet at home and didn't even have a mobile phone. Strangely, he left the charger for the PSP at home, suggesting he possibly intended to come back. Zeb Quinn. The guy goes missing. His car is found with a live puppy inside, headlights still on, and a pair of lips drawn on the back window with lipstick. The body in boiler stack 9. Basically, some maintenance workers found a well-cooked body in the stack of a boiler in the steam plant at a paper mill. Nobody knows who it was, but there are signs that he died very slowly. He was found with his clothes off and wrapped around his feet and hands, as if to protect himself from the searing hot metal. The theory is that he was exploring during the weekend when the boiler was off, got stuck, and was unable to alert anyone before they started the boilers back up the following week. The body had been in there for months by the time he was found. Antoinette K. Edito's kidnapping. She let her kidnapper in after he said that he was Uncle Joe, where they threw her into a van. The creepy part is a year later, someone called 911 claiming to be her, and someone shouts in the background who said you could use the phone. And a struggle is heard before the call cuts off. Antoinette's mom said that she was sure it was her daughter's voice. Then 4 years later, a girl matching Antoinette's description was acting strange in a diner and left a note on a napkin that said please help, call police. She's still missing, and she went missing in 1986. A few years ago, 2 Dutch girls went traveling to South America, Panama, and they went missing. The phone records were weird. They called 911 multiple times throughout the next few nights. Their camera was found with dozens of random photos taken in the middle of the night, as if they were trying to see using the flash. Then I think they found some body parts, a boot with a foot still inside, and a pelvis bone or something. Really creepy. Edit, Panama, not police. I read up on this one a lot when it happened. I believe the consensus is that they got lost on a trail and tried crossing a rope bridge in the dark. One of the girls slipped and fell and was badly injured or killed. The other took photos of where she had fallen and made a kind of map, and also took photos of that. She tried to go for help, but also must have fallen or died from starvation. Animals and rain are likely to blame for the body parts being as scattered as they were. It's a very sad tale and a hugely cautionary one. If you're going hiking and you don't know anything about the area, be very prepared and very careful. My favorite is probably John Lang's case. Basically, a local activist posts regularly about the Fresno Police Department and about how they were plotting against him. People thought he was crazy until he set up a camera that recorded lots of weird shit, including a bunch of cops parking across the street from his house staring at him in the middle of the night and a van pulling up with a large camera that people theorized took thermal pictures through walls to see if anyone was inside. He posted that weekend the police was going to murder him and accurately predicted his death. The police released a report saying that he was stabbed repeatedly in the back and then recanted, saying it was supposedly a suicide of a crazy man. The maximum headroom broadcasts. Probably the most harmless of any post here, because it was just a bloke in a mask chatting shit after hijacking Doctor Who. But if I was watching TV late at night and that thing happened, I wouldn't sleep for weeks. I posted about this before elsewhere, but the Veliscarax murders has got to be up there for me. Sometime around midnight between Sunday, June 9th, and Monday, June 10th, 1912, a person bludgeoned to death 8 people sleeping, including 2 adults and 6 children aged 5 through 12. Didn't they keep finding pairs of hands and feet around Hollywood Hills a few years back? I never heard an update on that case. The monster with 21 faces. An extortion case from Japan that had deadly consequences for the parties involved. If you like Ghost in the Shell, then this is the case for you.